The screaming started at 3 a.m. Not human screaming, something far worse. Sarah pressed her face against the cold window, her breath fogging the glass as she stared into the darkness next door. The silhouette of a man stood in his backyard, holding something that glinted in the moonlight. A chain. And at the end of that chain, a shadow writhed in the dirt. "Please," she whispered to the night, her phone trembling in her hand. Not again. But Dale Morrison had no intention of stopping. He'd been the neighborhood's nightmare for 3 years, and everyone knew it. The complaints, the police visits, the mysterious disappearances of pets, all of it led to this moment. What Sarah didn't know was that her decision to finally act would unleash a chain of events that would destroy everything Dale held dear. Because sometimes, when you push too far, the universe pushes back. And Dale Morrison was about to learn that karma doesn't just knock on your door, it kicks it down. Sarah Chen had lived at 1247 Maple Street for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. She knew this because she'd been counting down the days until her lease expired, praying she could escape before her sanity completely shattered. The source of her torment lived in the weathered 2-story house directly to her left, Dale Morrison, a man who seemed to collect suffering like other people collected stamps. The morning sun filtered through her kitchen blinds as she stood at the sink, mechanically washing the same coffee mug for the 3rd time. Her hands shook not from caffeine, but from the bone-deep exhaustion that came from 3 years of sleepless nights. Through the thin walls, she could hear it starting again, the low, rumbling growl of Dale's voice, followed by a sharp yelp that made her stomach clench. "Shut up, you worthless piece of..." Sarah slammed the water off, unable to bear another word. She'd heard variations of this scene countless times, but it never got easier. If anything, it got worse, because she knew what was coming next. The sound of a chain rattling against concrete. A whimper. Then silence. She grabbed her phone from the counter, her finger hovering over the familiar 3 digits. 911, she'd called them 14 times in the past year. 14 times she'd reported Dale Morrison for animal cruelty, noise violations, and disturbing the peace. 14 times the police had knocked on his door, listened to his smooth explanations, and left with nothing more than a warning. "Mrs. Chen," Officer Rodriguez had told her last month, his voice patient but tired, "we need concrete evidence. Without it, our hands are tied." Concrete evidence. Sarah's jaw clenched as she thought about the evidence she'd tried to gather. Photos through her fence of Dale's backyard, too blurry to show anything definitively. Audio recordings of the screaming, dismissed as possibly raccoons fighting. The mysterious disappearances of Mrs. Patterson's cat, the Johnson's golden retriever, and at least 3 other neighborhood pets, all written off as coincidence. But Sarah knew better. She'd seen the way Dale's eyes lit up when he talked about discipline. She'd watched him purchase chains, muzzles, and other equipment that no loving pet owner would ever need. Most damning of all, she'd seen him digging in his backyard at 2 a.m., his shovel scraping against something that made her blood run cold. A sharp bark from next door jolted her back to the present. This one was different, desperate, terrified. Sarah's heart hammered as she crept to her back door, pressing her ear against the wood. Through the thin barrier, she could hear Dale's voice, low and threatening. "You think you can bite me? You think you can draw blood from Dale Morrison?" The bark came again, weaker this time. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. She knew that bark. It belonged to Rex, the German shepherd that Dale had adopted from the shelter 3 weeks ago. She'd watched from her window as he'd brought the beautiful dog home, his tail wagging with innocent trust. That trust was about to be shattered. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of calling 911, she grabbed her phone and opened the camera app. If the police needed concrete evidence, she'd give them evidence they couldn't ignore. The back door creaked as she eased it open, her bare feet silent on the cold concrete of her patio. The 6-foot privacy fence that separated their properties had a loose board. She'd discovered it months ago but never had the courage to use it. Now, with Rex's life hanging in the balance, courage found her. She pressed her eye to the gap between the boards, and what she saw made her stomach lurch. Dale Morrison stood in the center of his backyard, his face twisted with rage. He was A big man, probably 6'2" and built like a linebacker, with the kind of cruel smile that made children cross the street. In his right hand, he held a thick chain leash. At the end of that chain, cowering in the dirt, was Rex. But Rex was no longer the proud, beautiful dog she'd seen 3 weeks ago. His coat was matted with mud and something darker. His ribs showed through his fur, and his left eye was swollen shut. Most horrifying of all, his tail, which had wagged so enthusiastically when Dale first brought him home, hung limp and broken. "You want to know what happens to dogs who bite their masters?" Dale's voice was conversational, almost friendly. He reached into a wooden box beside the fence and withdrew something that made Sarah's blood freeze. "A cattle prod." "No," Sarah whispered, but her voice was lost in the sound of Rex's terrified whimpering. Dale flicked the switch, and the cattle prod buzzed to life with an evil blue spark. Rex tried to back away, but the chain held him fast. The dog's eyes, the one that wasn't swollen shut, fixed on Dale with a look of such desperate pleading that Sarah felt her heart break. "Please," she found herself whispering. "Please don't." But Dale Morrison was beyond hearing please. He'd been building up to this moment for weeks, feeding off Rex's fear like a vampire feeds off blood. The cattle prod inched closer to the dog's trembling flank. That's when Sarah's phone started recording. She held it steady against the fence, the camera capturing every horrific detail. Dale's face, twisted with sadistic pleasure. Rex's terror-filled eyes. The cattle prod, crackling with electricity just inches from the dog's flesh. "This is what happens," Dale said, his voice barely above a whisper, "when you forget who owns you." The prod touched Rex's side, and the dog's scream shattered the morning quiet. It was a sound Sarah would hear in her nightmares for years to come, raw, primal, utterly inhuman in its agony. Rex's body convulsed as the electricity coursed through him, his legs kicking helplessly in the dirt. Sarah bit her lip so hard she tasted blood, but she kept recording. This was the evidence the police needed. This was what would finally put Dale Morrison behind bars. But Dale wasn't finished. He lifted the prod and smiled, studying Rex's twitching form with the cold detachment of a scientist examining a specimen. "That was for biting me," he said. "This is for existing." He pressed the prod to Rex's neck, and the dog's scream reached a pitch that seemed to tear the very air. Sarah watched in horror as Rex's body went rigid, his eyes rolling back in his head. For a terrifying moment, she thought the dog was dead. Then Rex's chest rose and fell, a shallow, panting breath that somehow seemed worse than death. Dale laughed, sound like breaking glass. "Still alive? Good. We are just getting started." Sarah had seen enough. Her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone, she ended the recording and immediately dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? "My neighbor is torturing his dog with a cattle prod," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I have video evidence. You need to send someone immediately." There was a pause. Then, "Did you say cattle prod?" "Yes. He's electrocuting a German shepherd in his backyard. The dog is barely conscious. Officers are on the way. Please stay on the line and remain in your home for your safety." Sarah wanted to stay on the line, wanted to follow instructions, wanted to be a good citizen. But as she watched Dale raise the cattle prod again, she knew she couldn't wait for help to arrive. Rex didn't have 5 minutes. He might not have 5 seconds. She dropped the phone and ran to her kitchen, grabbing the first thing her hands found, a cast-iron skillet. The back door slammed behind her as she sprinted to the fence, finding the loose board and shoving it aside. The gap was narrow, but adrenaline made her small. She squeezed through, scraping her shoulders against the rough wood. "Get away from him," she screamed, brandishing the skillet like a weapon. Dale spun around, his face registering first surprise, then amusement. Well. If it isn't the neighborhood busybody. "Come to save the day, Sarah." "I said get away from him." Sarah's voice was stronger now, fueled by pure rage. "I've already called the police. They are on their way." Dale's smile widened, revealing teeth that were too white and too sharp. "The police? You mean the same police who've been here 14 times and found nothing wrong? Those police?" Sarah's heart sank. He knew. Somehow, he knew exactly how many times she'd called, how many times she'd been dismissed. "This time is different," she said, holding up her phone. "I have video." For the first time, Dale's smile faltered. His eyes flicked to the phone, then back to her face. "Video? Of you torturing Rex? Of you using that cattle prod? The police are going to see exactly what kind of monster you are." Dale's expression shifted, the friendly mask slipping to reveal something much darker underneath. "Give me that phone." The booking photo would haunt Dale Morrison for the rest of his life. Not because of how he looked, though the cattle prod burns on his chest had left angry red welts that the camera captured in vivid detail, but because of what it represented. For the first time in 43 years, Dale Morrison was not in control. He sat in the holding cell at the Riverside County Jail, his orange jumpsuit scratching against his skin like a constant reminder of his fall from grace. The cell smelled of disinfectant and desperation, a cocktail that made his stomach churn. Around him, other inmates went about their morning routines, some reading, some exercising, others simply staring at the walls with the hollow eyes of men who had nothing left to lose. Dale had always believed he was different from these people. Better. Smarter. More careful. He'd spent years perfecting his image as the neighborhood's eccentric but harmless oddball, the guy who kept to himself and bothered no one. The fact that animals disappeared around him was just coincidence. The fact that his backyard was always freshly dug was just good gardening. The fact that he ordered industrial-grade soundproofing for his basement was just a man who valued his privacy. But Sarah Chen had shattered that carefully constructed facade with one 60-second video. "Morrison." The guard's voice echoed through the cell block. "You've got a visitor." Dale's heart jumped. His lawyer, probably. Gerald Hoffman was expensive, but he was good, the kind of good that could make video evidence disappear and turn victims into perpetrators. Dale had called him the moment they'd allowed him his phone call, and Gerald had promised to be there within the hour. The visiting room was a sterile white box divided by thick plexiglass. Dale took his seat and picked up the phone, expecting to see Gerald's familiar face. Instead, he found himself staring at a woman he'd never seen before, mid-30s, Asian American, with short black hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "My name is Linda Park. I'm the district attorney for Riverside County." Dale's blood ran cold. District attorneys didn't make personal visits to holding cells. They certainly didn't introduce themselves to defendants. "I think there's been a mistake. I'm waiting for my lawyer. Mr. Hoffman is in court this morning. He'll be here this afternoon." Linda's smile was sharp as a blade. "I wanted to talk to you first. Off the record. I'm not saying anything without my lawyer present." "That's your right. But I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." Linda leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his face. "We've been building a case against you for 2 years, Mr. Morrison. 2 years of missing pet reports, 2 years of complaints from neighbors, 2 years of circumstantial evidence that we couldn't quite piece together. Until yesterday." Dale's hands began to sweat. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Ground-penetrating radar is a wonderful technology," Linda continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "We've used it to search your backyard. All of it. The results are illuminating." The phone slipped from Dale's grasp, clattering against the metal shelf. He fumbled to pick it up, his hands shaking. "You can't do that. You need a warrant." "We have a warrant. Signed by Judge Martinez 20 minutes after we watched Mrs. Chen's video. That video, by the way, has been viewed by every law enforcement officer in this county. You're quite the celebrity, Mr. Morrison." Dale's mind raced. Ground-penetrating radar. They would find everything, every pet he'd buried, every moment of satisfaction he'd carved out for himself in the darkness of his backyard. The evidence he'd been so careful to hide was about to be laid bare under the California sun. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to understand the gravity of your situation. We found 18 separate burial sites in your backyard. 18. Each one represents a separate count of animal cruelty. Each one represents a family that wondered what happened to their beloved pet. 18. Dale's stomach lurched. Had it really been that many? The faces blurred together in his memory: the golden retriever that had trusted him so completely, the tabby cat that had purred in his arms before he'd shown at the basement, the German shepherd puppy that had been so young it hadn't even learned to be afraid. But that's not all, Linda continued. We've also found evidence of a more disturbing nature. Photographs, Mr. Morrison. Photographs you took of your activities. Apparently, you're quite the documentarian. Dale's world tilted. The photographs. He'd forgotten about the photographs, hidden in a fireproof safe in his basement. They were his trophies, his way of reliving the moments when he'd held absolute power over another living being. The look in their eyes just before the end, that's what he'd been capturing. That's what had fed his soul for so many years. Those photographs, combined with Mrs. Chen's video, paint a picture of a man who has been systematically torturing and killing animals for years. The federal authorities are very interested in your case, Mr. Morrison. Animal cruelty that crosses state lines. You did adopt some of those animals from out-of-state shelters, didn't you? Becomes a federal offense. You're bluffing. But Dale's voice lacked conviction. He knew Linda Park wasn't bluffing. The cold satisfaction in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. Am I? Let me tell you what's going to happen. In about an hour, the media is going to get wind of this story. Local man arrested for torturing animals will be the headline. Your face will be on every news station in the state. Your neighbors will finally understand what they've been living next to for 3 years. Dale's hands clenched into fists. They can't prove anything. Can't they? We have your DNA on the cattle prod. We have your fingerprints on the chain. We have video evidence of you torturing an animal. And in about 6 hours, we'll have the remains of 18 different animals. Each one a testament to your cruelty. The visiting room seemed to be closing in around him. Dale's carefully constructed world was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. For the first time in his life, he was truly powerless. But I'm not here to gloat, Linda said, her voice softening slightly. I'm here to offer you a choice. You can fight this case, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees, and eventually lose anyway. Or you can accept responsibility for what you've done. Accept responsibility. Plead guilty to the charges. Cooperate with our investigation. Help us understand how many animals you've killed, where you got them, whether there were any human victims we should know about. Dale's blood ran cold. Human victims. I never. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit is very interested in your case. They've identified several patterns in your behavior that suggest you may have been escalating. Animal cruelty is often a precursor to violence against humans, Mr. Morrison. They'll be conducting their own investigation. The room was spinning now. Dale gripped the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. I want my lawyer. I want Gerald Hoffman here right now. Of course. But before I go, I want you to think about something. Mrs. Chen's video has been seen by millions of people online. The public is calling for justice. They want to see you punished for what you've done to those innocent animals. The longer you fight this, the angrier they'll get. And angry people do angry things. Linda stood to leave, but Dale's voice stopped her. Wait. What about the dog? Rex? What about him? Did he survive? Linda's expression softened, and for a moment, Dale saw something that might have been pity in her eyes. He's alive. Barely. Dr. Martinez operated on him for 6 hours yesterday. 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding, electrical burns, malnutrition. And trauma that may never fully heal. But he's alive. Good, Dale said, and meant it. I'm glad he's alive. Are you? Are you really glad, Mr. Morrison? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you enjoyed every moment of what you did. To that dog. Dale wanted to deny it, wanted to explain that it wasn't about enjoyment, that it was about something deeper, something she could never understand. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he simply nodded. Think about my offer, Linda said. Think about the 18 families who deserve to know what happened to their pets. Think about the community that deserves to feel safe again. And think about Rex, fighting for his life because of what you did to him. She hung up the phone and walked away, leaving Dale alone with his thoughts. Around him, the other inmates continued their routines, oblivious to the fact that their newest cellmate was about to become the most hated man in California. Dale closed his eyes and tried to imagine a way out of this nightmare. But every scenario he constructed ended the same way, with him behind bars, his reputation destroyed, his life as he knew it over. The control he'd wielded for so many years was gone, replaced by the cold reality of consequences. For the first time in his adult life, Dale Morrison began to cry. 3 miles away, Sarah Chen sat in the waiting room of the Riverside Emergency Veterinary Clinic, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. She'd been here since yesterday afternoon, refusing to leave until she knew Rex's fate. The dog had become more than just a victim to her, he'd become a symbol of everything she'd been too afraid to fight for. Dr. Martinez emerged from the surgical suite, still wearing his scrubs. His face was grim, but his eyes held a spark of hope that made Sarah's heart leap. The news van arrived at 6:47 a.m., its satellite dish catching the first rays of dawn as it parked directly across from Dale Morrison's house. By 7:15, there were 3 vans. By 8 o'clock, the entire street was clogged with reporters, camera crews, and curious onlookers who had driven from across the county to see the home of the Maple Street monster. Sarah watched the circus unfold from her living room window, her second cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. She'd barely slept, Dale's text message playing on repeat in her mind. The phone had been buzzing all night, reporters who'd somehow gotten her number, neighbors wanting to know if she was okay, and strangers from the internet who'd seen the video and wanted to either praise her courage or condemn her actions. A sharp knock at her front door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a microphone in her hand. Behind her stood a cameraman, his equipment already rolling. "Mrs. Chen," the woman called. "I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We'd love to speak with you about your heroic actions yesterday." Heroic actions? Sarah almost laughed. She didn't feel heroic. She felt terrified, exhausted, and completely overwhelmed by the attention her 60-second video had generated. In less than 24 hours, it had been viewed over 2 million times on social media, shared by celebrities, and turned into memes that both celebrated and mocked her intervention. "Mrs. Chen." Jennifer called again. "The public has a right to know what happened here." Sarah ignored the reporter and moved to her kitchen, where her laptop displayed a dozen news articles about the case. The headlines made her stomach churn: "Neighbor from hell, local woman catches animal torturer on camera, cattle prod killer, inside the mind of Dale Morrison, hero or vigilante. Woman uses taser on neighbor to save dog." The last headline made her pause. Vigilante. Is that what she'd become? She'd used Dale's own weapon against him, delivered her own form of justice before the police arrived. The comment sections were divided, half calling her a hero, half questioning whether she'd gone too far. Her phone rang, and she glanced at the caller ID. "Animal Control, Riverside County." She answered immediately. "Mrs. Chen. This is Marcus Rodriguez from Animal Control. I'm calling about the German Shepherd from yesterday's incident." Sarah's heart raced. "Is Rex okay?" "He's stable. Dr. Martinez says is responding well to treatment. But we have a problem. We've received a legal challenge to our custody of the animal." "What kind of challenge?" "Dale Morrison's attorney is claiming that since the dog was legally his property, we can't make decisions about his care without his consent. He's demanding that Rex be returned to him." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Returned to him? After what he did?" "I know it sounds insane, but technically, he has a point. Until he's convicted of animal cruelty, he's still the legal owner. His lawyer is arguing that the dog was taken from him illegally. He's in jail. He can still make decisions about his property from jail. Look, Mrs. Chen, I'm on your side here. But we need to follow the law. The best thing you can do is make sure that video of yours is seen by every judge in the county. Sarah ended the call and stared at her laptop screen. The video was everywhere. Now on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, even LinkedIn. But would it be enough to keep Rex away from Dale? Another knock at the door, this one softer. Through the peephole, she saw a familiar face, Detective Williams, the officer who'd taken her statement yesterday. Mrs. Chen. I need to speak with you about Mr. Morrison. Sarah opened the door, noting how the detective's arrival sent the reporters into a frenzy. Cameras flashed as Detective Williams stepped inside, his expression grim. We have a problem, he said without preamble. Morrison made bail this morning. Sarah's legs went weak. Bail? How is that possible? His lawyer argued that is not a flight risk, that he has ties to the community. The judge set bail at $50,000. Morrison's family posted it an hour ago. But the threats, he sent me a text message last night. Detective Williams' expression darkened. Show me. Sarah pulled up the message on her phone. The detective read it twice, his jaw tightening with each word. This is a direct threat. We can arrest him for this. Can you? Because right now, I don't feel very safe. I understand your concern. But there's something else you need to know. Morrison's not just out on bail, he's coming home. Today. Sarah's vision blurred. Home? He's coming back here. The judge ordered him to stay away from you and your property, but he can't prevent him from returning to his own home. There'll be a patrol car on the street, and we've installed a panic button system in your house. If Morrison so much as looks at you wrong, we'll know about it. As if summoned by their conversation, a commotion erupted outside. Sarah looked through the window and saw a black sedan pulling into Dale's driveway. The reporters surged forward like a school of sharks sensing blood. Dale Morrison emerged from the passenger seat, and Sarah's breath caught. Jail had not been kind to him. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and hollow. But the hatred burning in those eyes was unmistakable, even from a distance. He turned toward Sarah's house, and for a moment, their eyes met through the window. He smiled. It was the same smile she'd seen in the backyard, the same expression he'd worn while torturing Rex. But now it was directed at her. Mrs. Chen. Detective Williams had noticed her reaction. Are you okay? He's looking at me, she whispered. He's looking right at me. Detective Williams moved to the window and immediately reached for his radio. This is Williams. I need backup at 1247 Maple Street. Morrison is violating his restraining order. But when they looked again, Dale had disappeared into his house. The reporters continued their vigil, but the immediate threat was gone. Pack a bag, Detective Williams said. I'm recommending you stay somewhere else for a few days. No. Sarah's voice was stronger than she felt. I'm not running. I've been running from him for 3 years. I'm not going to start again now. Mrs. Chen, he wants me to be afraid. He wants me to feel like a victim. But I'm not a victim anymore. I'm the woman who stopped him, and I'm the woman who's going to make sure he never hurts another animal. Again. Detective Williams studied her face, seeing something there that made him nod slowly. Then we'll make sure you're protected. But you need to be smart about this. Morrison is desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. As the detective left, Sarah's phone buzzed with another text. This time, it was from an unknown number, but she recognized the writing style immediately. Nice show for the cameras. But when they leave, it'll just be you and me again. And this time, I won't be so gentle. Sarah stared at the message, her hands trembling. Then she did something that surprised even herself. She typed back. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Dale. And I'm not going anywhere. The response came immediately, we'll see about that. Sarah set the phone down and looked out at Dale's house. The windows were dark, but she knew he was watching. Planning. Waiting for his chance. But Sarah Chen was no longer the frightened woman who had cowered behind her fence for 3 years. She was the woman who had faced down a monster and won. and she was ready to do it again. Outside, the media circus continued, but Sarah barely noticed. Her attention was focused on the house next door, where Dale Morrison was undoubtedly planning his next move. The battle for Rex's life had been won, but the war for her own was just beginning. Her phone rang again. This time, it was Dr. Martinez. "Mrs. Chen. I have good news. Rex is awake and is asking for you." "Asking for me?" "He won't let anyone else near him. He seems to remember that you saved him. Can you come down to the clinic?" Sarah looked out at Dale's house one more time. "I'll be right there." As she grabbed her keys, she made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't just going to adopt Rex, she was going to turn him into the weapon Dale Morrison would never see coming. The war was about to get very interesting. Rex's eyes tracked Sarah's movement the moment she entered the recovery room at the veterinary clinic. Despite the pain medication, despite the trauma, despite everything Dale Morrison had done to break his spirit, the German Shepherd's gaze was alert and focused. When Sarah approached his cage, his tail, still bandaged but healing, gave the faintest wag. "Hey, boy," Sarah whispered, extending her hand slowly. "Remember me?" Rex's response was immediate and heartbreaking. He pressed his nose against the cage bars, straining to reach her despite the 4 tubes and monitoring wires attached to his body. A soft whine escaped his throat, not of pain, but of recognition, of desperate need for connection with the one person who had fought for him. Dr. Martinez stood behind Sarah, his expression a mixture of professional satisfaction and deep concern. "I've been practicing veterinary medicine for 15 years, he said quietly. "I've never seen a dog respond to trauma the way Rex has. Physically, he's healing faster than should be possible. But psychologically..." "What do you mean?" "He won't let anyone else near him. My assistants tried to change his bandages this morning, and he nearly bit one of them. Not out of aggression, out of terror. But the moment you walked in, look at him." Sarah looked. Rex had managed to position himself as close to her as the cage would allow, his one unbandaged eye fixed on her face with an intensity that was almost human. It was as if he understood that she was the line between safety and the nightmare he'd endured. "Can I touch him?" "Go ahead. But slowly." Sarah opened the cage door and carefully extended her hand. Rex immediately pressed his head against her palm, and she felt him tremble, not with fear, but with relief so profound it was almost overwhelming. His fur was still patchy where the electrical burns had left marks, but beneath her fingers, she could feel the strong, steady heartbeat of a survivor. "Good boy," she murmured. "You're safe now. I promise you're safe." As if he understood her words, Rex's entire body seemed to relax. The tension that had kept him rigid with hypervigilance melted away, and for the first time since the attack, he closed his eyes. "Remarkable," Dr. Martinez said. "I think you two were meant to find each other." Sarah's phone buzzed. Another text from Dale, "Enjoying your visit with my dog. Don't get too attached. He'll be coming home soon." Sarah's jaw clenched, but she forced herself to remain calm. Rex seemed to sense her tension and opened his eyes, studying her face with concern. "Dr. Martinez," she said, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "How long before Rex is strong enough to go home? Physically?" "Another week, maybe 2. But Mrs. Chen, I have to warn you, Rex is going to need extensive rehabilitation. The trauma he's suffered isn't just physical. He's going to be afraid of men, afraid of loud noises, afraid of chains or anything that reminds him of what happened. It's going to take months, maybe years, to help him trust again." "What about protection training?" Dr. Martinez's eyebrows shot up. "Protection training? Mrs. Chen, this dog has been tortured. The last thing he needs is more aggression training." "Not aggression," Sarah clarified, her hand still stroking Rex's head. "Protection. There's a difference. I want him to feel safe, but I also want him to be able to protect himself. And me." The veterinarian studied her face, seeing something there that made him choose his words carefully. "Are you still in danger from Morrison? He made bail this morning. He's back home, next door to me." And he's made it very clear that this isn't over. Dr. Martinez was quiet for a long moment. Then, there's a trainer I know. Maria Santos. She specializes in rehabilitation for abused animals, but she also does protection work. If anyone can help Rex heal while teaching him to defend himself and you, it's her. Can you call her? I'll call her right now. As Dr. Martinez stepped out to make the call, Sarah found herself alone with Rex. The dog had managed to work his head closer to her hand, and she could feel him breathing against her palm, steady, trusting breaths that spoke of a bond forged in violence but sealed in salvation. You know what he did to you, she said softly. And you know I stopped him. We are going to help each other, Rex. We are going to make sure he never hurts anyone again. Rex's tail wagged slightly, as if he understood not just her words but her intention. Dr. Martinez returned 20 minutes later with Maria Santos in tow. The trainer was a compact woman in her 40s with calloused hands and eyes that seemed to see everything. She approached Rex's cage slowly, reading his body language with the expertise of someone who had worked with traumatized animals for decades. He's been through hell, she said simply. But he's not broken. Look at his eyes when he watches you, Mrs. Chen. That's not just gratitude, that's partnership. He sees you as his pack leader, the one who saved him from the monster. Can you help him? I can help both of you. But I need to know, what exactly are you preparing for? Sarah told her everything. Dale's threats, his release on bail, the legal challenge to Rex's custody, the certainty that Morrison wouldn't give up until he'd destroyed both of them. Maria listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. I've dealt with men like Morrison before, Maria said finally. They don't just hurt animals, they use animals to hurt people. He tortured Rex to feed his own need for control, but now that you've taken that control away, he's going to try to reclaim it. The question is, are you prepared to do what's necessary to stop him? What do you mean? I mean that if Morrison comes after you or Rex again, you're going to have to be ready to end it. Permanently. Are you prepared for that? Sarah looked down at Rex, who was watching the conversation with intelligent eyes. The dog had fought back against his torturer, had found the strength to bite the hand that hurt him. Now it was her turn to find that same strength. Yes, she said. I'm prepared. Maria nodded. Then we start tomorrow. But not here, Morrison might be watching the clinic. I have a private facility 20 miles outside town. We'll work there. Until Rex is ready. Ready for what? To be the guardian you need and the weapon Morrison will never see coming. As they made arrangements for Rex's transfer to Maria's facility, Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text, it was a news alert. Breaking, federal authorities launch investigation into Dale Morrison case, evidence suggests possible interstate animal trafficking ring. Sarah's heart raced as she read the article. The FBI had taken over the case, following leads that suggested Dale's activities went far beyond simple animal cruelty. They'd found evidence of communications with similar individuals in other states, suggesting a network of people who shared his twisted interests. But the most chilling detail was buried in the third paragraph. Authorities believe Morrison may have been planning to escalate his activities beyond animals, possibly targeting human victims. Sarah showed the article to Maria, whose expression turned grim. This changes things, the trainer said. If the FBI thinks he was planning to hurt people, then you're not just in danger, you're the primary target of a man who has nothing left to lose. All the more reason to make sure Rex is ready. Maria studied Sarah's face, seeing the determination there. You know this isn't going to end with training sessions and restraining orders, don't you? Morrison is going to come for you, and when he does, it's going to be a fight to the death. Sarah looked down at Rex, who was still pressed against her hand, still trusting her to keep him safe. She thought about the 18 graves in Dale's backyard, about the photographs he'd taken, about the cattle prod and the broken tail and the look of sadistic pleasure on his face when he'd hurt an innocent creature. Then we'd better make sure we win, she said. As they left the clinic, Rex walking slowly beside Sarah on a special harness that accommodated his injuries, Dale Morrison watched from his bedroom window. He'd been tracking their movements through binoculars, noting the trainer, the private conversation, the way the dog stayed close to Sarah's side. He smiled as he reached for his phone, scrolling through a contact list that contained numbers. For people who shared his particular interests. People who understood that sometimes, to truly break someone, you had to take away everything they cared about. The message he sent was simple: need a favor. Payment guaranteed. Target is a German Shepherd and his new owner. Make it look like an accident. The response came within minutes. When and where? Dale Morrison's smile widened as he typed his reply. Sarah Chen thought she'd won, thought she'd found her courage and her guardian. But she had no idea what he was truly capable of. The war was about to enter its deadliest phase. The first attempt came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week after Rex had begun his training with Maria Santos. Sarah woke to the sound of her security system's motion sensors, followed immediately by Rex's low, warning growl from his position beside her bed. She'd moved him into a bedroom on Maria's recommendation. A protection dog needs to know where his principal is at all times, the trainer had explained. And you need to know that someone is watching over you while you sleep. Now, as Rex's hackles rose and his body tensed into an attack position, Sarah realized how prescient that advice had been. The motion sensor lights in her backyard flickered on, illuminating 2 figures dressed in black who had just scaled her fence. They moved with the practiced efficiency of professionals, their faces covered by ski masks, their hands carrying objects that Sarah couldn't quite make out in the darkness. Rex's growl deepened, and Sarah placed a calming hand on his head. In the past week, Maria had worked miracles with the German Shepherd. The broken, terrified animal from the veterinary clinic had been transformed into something magnificent and deadly. His wounds had healed, his strength had returned, and most importantly, his trust in Sarah had grown into an unbreakable bond. But more than that, Rex had learned to channel his trauma into purpose. Every session with Maria had built his confidence, taught him to distinguish between normal human behavior and threatening behavior, trained him to protect without losing control. The dog who had once cowered before Dale Morrison was now a guardian capable of bringing down a grown man. Sarah reached for her phone, but before she could dial 911, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, and Sarah heard the soft sound of her front door being tested. They'd cut the power, disabled her security system, and were now attempting multiple points of entry. These weren't random burglars, this was a coordinated assault. Dale's network had found her. Rex, she whispered, using the command word Maria had taught her. Protect. The German Shepherd's demeanor shifted instantly. Gone was the gentle pet who had been sleeping peacefully beside her bed. In his place stood a weapon of controlled violence, every muscle coiled and ready to strike. His eyes reflected what little moonlight filtered through the windows, giving him an almost supernatural appearance. The front door opened with a soft click. Sarah's heart hammered as she realized they'd somehow bypassed her locks without making a sound. Professional burglars. Contract killers. She'd read enough about Dale's network to know that his associates included people with very specialized skills. Footsteps moved through her living room, at least 2 people, possibly 3. They were being careful, but Rex's enhanced hearing tracked their every movement. The dog's head turned slightly, following sounds that Sarah couldn't detect. A floorboard creaked just outside her bedroom door. Rex moved like liquid shadow, flowing from beside the bed to a position near the door where he could strike with maximum effect. Sarah grabbed the baseball bat she'd kept beside her nightstand since Dale's release, her hands sweating despite the cool night air. The bedroom door handle turned slowly. Sarah held her breath as the door eased open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the slightly lighter hallway. The intruder stepped into the room, and Sarah could see he was holding something in his right hand, a syringe. They weren't here to kill her quickly. They were here to take her alive. The intruder took another step into the room, scanning the darkness for her bed. That's when Rex struck. The German Shepherd exploded from his position. Like a missile, his 90 pounds of muscle and fury colliding with the intruder's chest. The man went down hard, his scream of surprise and pain echoing through the house. The syringe flew from his hand, skittering across the floor. Rex's jaws clamped down on the man's forearm, and the sound of bones breaking was audible even over the intruder's screams. The dog held on, shaking his head with controlled violence that would have made Dale Morrison proud for all the wrong reasons. "Rex, hold," Sarah commanded, and the dog immediately stopped shaking while maintaining his grip. The intruder was pinned, unable to move without causing himself more damage. That's when the second intruder appeared in the doorway. This one was smarter, staying back and raising what Sarah now realized was a tranquilizer gun. In the darkness, she could see the red laser dot as he aimed at Rex. Sarah didn't think. She didn't plan. She simply moved. The baseball bat connected with the gunman's wrist with a crack that echoed through the house. The tranquilizer gun flew from his grip, and he stumbled backward, clutching his injured hand. But instead of retreating, he reached for something else, a real gun, Sarah realized with terror. "Rex, attack!" as she screamed. The German Shepherd released the first intruder and launched himself at the second man just as the gun cleared its holster. Rex's weight drove the gunman backward into the hallway wall, and the weapon discharged into the ceiling, filling the house with the deafening sound of gunfire. Sarah heard more movement downstairs, at least one more intruder, possibly two. They were no longer trying to be quiet. The mission had gone sideways, and now it was about completion rather than stealth. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911 while Rex continued his assault on the second intruder. The man was trying to fend off the dog with his uninjured hand, but Rex had been trained for exactly this scenario. Every move the intruder made was anticipated and countered. 911, what's your emergency? Home invasion, Sarah said, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. Multiple armed intruders. Shots fired. I need police and paramedics at 1247 Maple Street. Are you safe? Before Sarah could answer, the lights came back on. Someone had restored power, which meant either the intruders had an accomplice outside, or worse, the police had arrived and were now working their way through the house. "Sarah Chen," a voice called from downstairs. "This is Detective Williams. Are you all right?" Relief flooded through her. "I'm upstairs. 2 intruders down." Rex had stopped his attack on Sarah's command, but he remained poised over the second gunman, who was now unconscious and bleeding from multiple bite wounds. The first intruder was conscious but clearly in shock, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. Detective Williams appeared in the doorway, his weapon drawn, and stopped short when he saw the scene. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. "What happened here?" "They tried to inject me with something," Sarah said, pointing to the syringe. "They had tranquilizer guns. This wasn't a robbery, they were trying to take me alive." Williams knelt beside the syringe, careful not to contaminate the evidence. "We need to get this analyzed immediately. And we need to get you somewhere safe." "How did you get here so fast?" "We've been watching Morrison's house. About an hour ago, we saw him leave with 2 other men. We tried to follow, but they gave us the slip. When we couldn't locate them, I decided to check on you." Sarah looked down at Rex, who was still maintaining his guard position over the unconscious gunman. The dog's fur was matted with blood, none of it his own, and his eyes held a alertness that spoke of a job well done. "Good boy," she said softly. "You saved my life." Rex's tail wagged once, a controlled movement that didn't compromise his vigilance. Paramedics arrived and began working on the 2 intruders while crime scene technicians processed the evidence. The syringe contained a powerful sedative that would have rendered Sarah unconscious within seconds. The tranquilizer gun was loaded with enough drugs to drop a horse. But it was the third piece of evidence that chilled Sarah to the bone, a zip tie restraint and a black hood found in the first intruder's pocket. "They were planning to kidnap you," Detective Williams explained. "Take you somewhere isolated where Morrison and his friends could express their displeasure." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, "Nice guard dog. Too bad. He won't always be there to protect you." Williams saw the message and his jaw tightened. "We are moving you to a safe house. Tonight." "No," Sarah said firmly. "If I run now, I'll be running forever. Morrison needs to know that his plan failed. He needs to know that Rex and I are ready for whatever he sends next. Mrs. Chen, these men were professionals. Morrison is escalating beyond anything we anticipated. Then maybe it's time we escalated too. Sarah looked down at Rex, who was still covered in the blood of the men who had tried to hurt her. The dog had found his purpose in protecting her, had transformed his trauma into strength. Now it was her turn to do the same. The war between Sarah Chen and Dale Morrison had claimed its first casualties. But as the paramedics loaded the broken intruders into ambulances, Sarah realized something that made her smile for the first time in days. She was winning. And Dale Morrison was about to learn that some prey fights back harder than predators expect. The courthouse was a fortress of marble and glass that had witnessed thousands of human dramas, but few as intensely watched as people versus Dale Morrison. Sarah sat in the front row of the gallery, Rex at her feet wearing a service dog vest that granted him access to the proceedings. The German Shepherd's presence was both symbolic and practical. Every person in that courtroom could see the living evidence of Dale Morrison's cruelty, but they could also see how completely that same dog trusted the woman who had saved his life. 3 weeks had passed since the failed kidnapping attempt. 3 weeks during which Dale's world had systematically collapsed. The two men who had invaded Sarah's home had been identified as Marcus Webb and Tommy Castellanos, career criminals with connections to an underground network that specialized in what law enforcement euphemistically called extreme animal entertainment. Under interrogation, they had given up Dale and 17 other members of a multi-state operation that had been trading animals, videos, and increasingly disturbing fantasies for over 5 years. The FBI's investigation had uncovered a digital warehouse of horrors that made Sarah's stomach turn when Detective Williams described it to her. Thousands of videos, detailed discussions of techniques, and most damning of all, a progression chart that showed how members were encouraged to escalate from animals to human victims. Dale Morrison hadn't just been a neighborhood monster, he'd been a student preparing for graduation to mass murder. Now he sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed to a chain around his waist. The confident predator, who had terrorized Maple Street for 3 years, had been replaced by a hollow-eyed man who flinched every time Rex shifted position. Prison had not been kind to Dale Morrison. Word of his crimes had spread through the inmate population, and men who had no qualms about violence drew the line at torturing animals. His face bore the evidence of multiple beatings, and his left eye remained permanently swollen from an encounter with a lifer named Rodriguez who had once owned a pit bull. Mr. Morrison, District Attorney Linda Park began her opening statement. Thought he was untouchable. For 3 years, he terrorized a neighborhood, tortured innocent animals, and escalated toward violence against human beings. He believed that his careful planning, his soundproofing, his disposal methods would keep him safe from consequences. Linda gestured toward Sarah and Rex. He was wrong. Because he underestimated the courage of one woman and the loyalty of one dog who refused to be broken. Dale's lawyer, Gerald Hoffman, had tried every legal maneuver possible. He'd attempted to suppress the video evidence, claiming it was obtained illegally. He'd argued that Dale's text messages were protected speech. He'd even suggested that Rex had been the aggressor in the original incident. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the federal charges carried mandatory minimums that made plea bargaining impossible. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Hoffman said in his opening statement, my client is guilty of animal cruelty. We don't dispute that. But the prosecution wants you to believe that he's some kind of criminal mastermind, the leader of a vast conspiracy. The truth is that Dale Morrison is a mentally ill man who made terrible choices and needs treatment, not a life sentence. Sarah felt Rex tense beside her at the sound of Dale's name, and she placed a calming hand on his head. The dog had been through extensive therapy with Maria Santos to prepare for this moment, being in the same room as his former torturer. But Rex's training held. He remained alert but controlled, a living testament to the possibility of healing from trauma. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Linda Park walked the jury through the timeline of Dale's crimes, starting with the missing pets and escalating through the 18 bodies found in his backyard. She presented the photographs Dale had taken, the videos he had shared with his network, and the detailed plans he had made for future victims. But it was Sarah's testimony that broke the courtroom's composure. Describe what you saw through the fence that morning, Linda prompted. Sarah's voice was steady as she recounted the scene that had changed everything. The cattle prod Rex's terrified whimpering. Dale's expression of sadistic pleasure. The jury listened in horrified silence as she described the moment she decided to intervene. What were you feeling when you saw Mr. Morrison torturing Rex? Rage, Sarah said simply. Pure, absolute rage. I was tired of being afraid. Tired of watching innocent creatures suffer while I hid behind my fence. Rex was fighting for his life, and I realized I had to fight too. Gerald Hoffman's cross-examination was brutal but ineffective. He tried to paint Sarah as a vigilante who had exceeded her authority, but every question only reinforced her heroism in the jury's minds. Isn't it true, Mrs. Chen, that you used Mr. Morrison's own weapon against him? Yes. You didn't wait for police. You took justice into your own hands. I stopped a man from torturing an animal. If that's taking justice into my own hands, then I'd do it again. The courtroom erupted in applause and the judge had to call for order. But it was the prosecution's final witness that sealed Dale's fate. Dr. Elizabeth Crawford was a forensic psychiatrist who had spent 6 months evaluating Dale and his network. Her testimony painted a picture of a man who had carefully constructed a fantasy world where he held absolute power over helpless creatures and who had been methodically planning to extend that power to human victims. Mr. Morrison's psychological profile indicates a high probability of escalation to homicide, Dr. Crawford testified. His communications with network members show detailed planning for what he called the next level. We found extensive research into homeless populations, sex workers, and other vulnerable groups. In my professional opinion, if he hadn't been stopped when we would be investigating multiple murders within the next 6 months. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Dale Morrison's face crumpled as the verdicts were read. 23 federal counts of animal cruelty, conspiracy to commit torture, possession and distribution of animal abuse materials, interstate transportation of stolen animals, and the charge that would keep him locked away forever, conspiracy to commit murder. Judge Martinez looked down at Dale with unconcealed disgust. Mr. Morrison, in 30 years on the bench, I have rarely encountered such a calculated pattern of cruelty. You systematically tortured innocent animals, documented their suffering for your own pleasure, and planned to extend that suffering to human beings. You showed no mercy to your victims, and this court will show no mercy to you. Life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. Dale's scream of anguish echoed through the courtroom. He turned toward Sarah, his face twisted with hatred and desperation. This isn't over, he screamed. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started. There are others. Others who know where you live, who know the bailiffs. Moved quickly, restraining Dale as he thrashed against his chains. But his eyes remained locked on Sarah's, burning with a promise of revenge that transcended prison walls. As they dragged him away, Sarah felt Rex lean against her leg. The dog was calm, alert, ready for whatever came next. The trauma that had once defined him had been transformed into strength, loyalty, and an unbreakable bond with the woman who had saved his life. Outside the courthouse, the media circus that had followed the case for months reached its crescendo. Sarah emerged into a sea of cameras and microphones, but for once, she didn't feel overwhelmed by the attention. She had something to say. Dale Morrison believed that power came from causing pain, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the crowd. He believed that innocent creatures existed for his pleasure, his control, his sadistic needs. He was wrong. She reached down and placed her hand on Rex's head. The German Shepherd looked up at her with complete trust, the same dog who had once cowered in Dale's backyard now standing proud and confident beside his protector. Real power comes from protecting those who can't protect themselves. It comes from standing up to bullies, from refusing to be afraid, from choosing courage over comfort. Dale Morrison thought he broke Rex, but Rex broke free. He thought he could terrorize me into silence, but instead, I found my voice. Sarah paused, looking directly into the cameras. To anyone else out there who thinks they can hurt innocent creatures without consequences, look at Rex. Look at what he became when someone finally stood up for him. We are watching. We are waiting. And we are not afraid of you anymore. As Sarah and Rex walked away from the courthouse, Detective Williams caught up with them. "There's something you should know," he said quietly. "Morrison wasn't lying about the others. We've identified at least 40 members of his network, and most of them are still out there." This conviction sent shockwaves through their community, but it also painted a target on your back. Sarah looked down at Rex, who was scanning their surroundings with professional alertness. "Let them come," she said. "Rex and I will be ready." But as they drove home through the California sunshine, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Dale Morrison's final threat hadn't been the desperate ravings of a defeated man. It had sounded like a promise. And promises, Sarah had learned, had a way of coming true when you least expected them. The war might be over, but the aftermath was just beginning. 6 months after Dale Morrison's conviction, Sarah Chen had become something she never intended to be, a target with a price on her head. The threat arrived in her mailbox on a Tuesday morning, tucked between utility bills and grocery store circulars. No return address, no postmark, hand-delivered under cover of darkness. Inside the plain white envelope was a photograph of her walking Rex through Riverside Park, taken with a telephoto lens from considerable distance. On the back, someone had written in careful block letters, $50,000 for the woman. $10,000 for the dog. Proof of death required. Sarah studied the photograph with the detached calm she'd developed over the past months. The image showed her from 3 days ago, captured during her morning routine. Whoever had taken it knew her schedule, her habits, her vulnerabilities. They'd been watching her for weeks, maybe months. Rex sensed her tension and moved closer, his body language shifting into the alert readiness that Maria Santos had trained into him. The German Shepherd had filled out considerably since his rescue, his coat now thick and lustrous, his eyes bright with intelligence and confidence. But beneath the healthy exterior lay a weapon honed by trauma and refined by expert training. "Looks like we've got company," Sarah murmured, scratching behind Rex's ears. The phone rang as she was photographing the threat for Detective Williams. The caller ID showed unknown, but Sarah answered anyway. She'd stopped hiding from Dale's network months ago. "Sarah Chen." The voice was electronically distorted, probably run through a voice modulator. "You received our message." "I did. 50,000 seems low. I would have expected Dale's friends to value me higher." "Clever. But not clever enough to stay alive. You destroyed one of our founding members. You exposed our entire network. 17 of our brothers are now in federal prison because of you." "Good. I hope they enjoy their new accommodations. You think this is a game? You think because you have your little guard dog and your police protection that you're safe?" Sarah walked to her living room window and peered through the blinds. The street appeared normal, a few parked cars, Mrs. Patterson walking her new kitten on a leash, the mailman making his rounds. But Sarah had learned to see beyond surface appearances. The grey sedan parked 3 houses down had been there for 4 days. The telephone repair van that appeared every Tuesday was from a company that didn't exist. The jogger who ran past her house at exactly 7:15 a.m. never seemed to break a sweat. "I think you're scared," Sarah said into the phone. "I think Dale Morrison was supposed to be untouchable, and when I brought him down, it terrified all of you. Now you're realizing that your little network isn't as powerful as you thought." The silence on the other end stretched for long seconds. "Then, we know about Maria Santos. We know about your training facility. We know about Detective Williams and his surveillance schedule. We know everything, Sarah Chen. And knowing is power." The line went dead. Sarah immediately called Maria, who answered on the first ring. "They made contact," Sarah reported. "I was expecting this. Pack a bag. You and Rex are coming to the compound." "No. If I run now, you're not running. You're advancing to the next phase of your training." Maria Santos had established her compound on 200 acres of rugged California desert, 40 miles from the nearest town. What had started as a rehabilitation center for abused animals had evolved into something far more sophisticated, a training facility where victims learned to become guardians, where the broken learned to fight back. Sarah had been visiting the compound twice a week since Dale's conviction, but she'd never stayed overnight. Now, as Maria's truck wound through the dusty hills toward the main building, she realized how much the place had changed. Security cameras tracked their approach from multiple angles. Motion sensors lined the access road. And when they reached the main gate, Sarah saw at least 3 guards positioned at strategic points around the perimeter. How many people know about this place? Sarah asked. The right people, Maria replied cryptically. Government types who understand that sometimes justice requires more than courtrooms and prison sentences. The main building was a converted ranch house surrounded by training facilities that looked more military than civilian. Sarah counted obstacle courses, firing ranges, and what appeared to be a tactical driving course. In one of the outdoor pens, she saw a woman working with a Belgian Malinois on attack commands. Who is she? Jennifer Walsh. Her family was murdered by her ex-husband after he got out on a technicality. He's in the ground now, and she's helping other women learn to defend themselves. Sarah recognized the name. Jennifer was the reporter who had tried to interview her during Dale's arrest. She's not a reporter. She was. Until her story became personal. Rex jumped out of the truck and immediately began surveying the compound with professional interest. His nose twitched as he catalogued scents, his ears tracking sounds that Sarah couldn't detect. The dog had developed an almost supernatural awareness since his rescue, as if his trauma had heightened his senses rather than dulling them. Welcome to Advanced Placement, Maria said, leading them toward the main building. Everything you've learned so far has been kindergarten compared to what we are going to teach you now. Inside, the ranch house had been converted into a sophisticated operations center. Computer monitors lined one wall, displaying surveillance feeds from around the compound. Another wall was covered with photographs and documents connected by red string, the kind of investigation board Sarah had seen in crime movies. But it was the faces on the board that made her blood run cold. Dale Morrison's photograph was at the center, surrounded by dozens of other men whose eyes held the same predatory coldness. Some had been crossed out in red marker, indicating capture or death. But most remained unmarked. Jesus, Sarah whispered. How many of them are there? We've identified 237 active members across 14 states, Maria replied. But the network is larger than that. For every one we know about, there are probably 3 we haven't found yet. Jennifer Walsh emerged from a side room, no longer looking like the polished reporter Sarah remembered. Her hair was shorter, her clothing practical, and there was a hardness in her eyes that spoke of violence endured and violence returned. Sarah Chen, Jennifer said, extending her hand. We need to talk. They gathered around a conference table covered with files and photographs. Jennifer opened a laptop and began scrolling through what appeared to be a database of criminals. Dale Morrison wasn't just a member of this network, Jennifer explained. He was one of their recruiters. He identified and groomed new members, helped them escalate their activities, and most importantly, he kept detailed records of everything they did. What kind of records? Videos, photographs, personal information about victims, financial transactions, communication logs. The FBI found terabytes of data in his basement that we are still processing. Sarah felt sick. He documented everything. Everything. Including his plans for you. Jennifer pulled up a file labeled Chen, Sarah, Target Profile. Sarah's hands shook as she read the contents. Dale had compiled a comprehensive dossier on her life, her work schedule, her family members, her daily routines, even her medical records somehow obtained from insurance databases. But worse than the invasion of privacy were the detailed plans for what Dale called correction protocols. Step-by-step instructions for kidnapping, torture methods designed to break her psychologically, and a timeline that stretched over months of planned suffering before her eventual murder. This was never about revenge, Sarah realized. This was about control. He wanted to break me completely before he killed me. And now his network has inherited those plans, Maria said grimly. Along with his obsession with you. Rex had positioned himself beside Sarah's chair, his body language indicating he sensed her distress. She placed her hand on his head, drawing comfort from his steady presence. So what do we do? Sarah asked. Jennifer's smile was sharp as a blade. We hunt them before they hunt us. The next several hours were a crash course in asymmetric warfare. Maria and Jennifer explained how they'd been building a network of their own victims and survivors who had been trained to fight back against predators. They had resources, intelligence, and most importantly, the kind of motivation that came from personal experience with evil. The police and FBI are good at catching criminals after crimes have been committed, Maria explained. But they are limited by laws, evidence requirements, and bureaucracy. We're not. You're talking about vigilante justice. I'm talking about survival, Jennifer corrected. These people don't follow rules. They don't respect laws. They prey on the innocent and hide behind legal technicalities when they are caught. Sometimes, the only way to stop a predator is to become a better predator. Sarah looked at the wall of photographs at the faces of men who had dedicated their lives to causing suffering. She thought about the 18 animals buried in Dale's backyard, about Rex's broken tail and terrified eyes, about the detailed plans for her own torture and murder. What do you need me to do? Maria's smile was proud. We need you to be the bait. The plan they outlined was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Sarah would return home, resume her normal routine, and wait for Dale's network. The call to her sister Linda was the hardest conversation Sarah had ever had to make. She sat in Maria's compound office, Rex at her feet, staring at her phone for 20 minutes before finally dialing the number. How do you tell someone you love that your decision to save a dog has painted a target on their back? Sarah. Linda's voice was bright with genuine pleasure. I was just thinking about you. Did you see the article in the Chronicle about your case? They are calling you a hero. Linda, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't ask questions, don't argue, just listen. Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. You're in danger. Because of me, because of what I did to Dale. Morrison, there are people who want to hurt you to get to me. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. Then, Sarah, what are you talking about? Pack a bag. Right now. Take Emma and David and drive to the Marriott downtown. Check in under Mom's maiden name. Don't go to work, don't stop at your usual places, don't tell anyone where you're going except me. Sarah, you're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. These people murdered 17 families before the FBI caught them. They have a network across 14 states. And they have photos of your apartment building taken yesterday. Sarah heard the sharp intake of breath, followed by the sound of Linda moving quickly through her apartment. Oh God. Oh God, Sarah. What did you do? I saved a dog's life. And I'd do it again. Sarah's voice hardened. But I won't let them hurt you because of my choices. Are you packing? Yes, I'm packing. Should I call the police? The police are already involved. But Linda, there's something else. I'm not running from these people. I'm going to stop them. What does that mean? Sarah looked around the compound at the weapons on the walls, at the surveillance equipment, at Jennifer Walsh cleaning a rifle by the window. It means I've learned to fight back. And when they come for me, they are going to get more than they bargained for. Sarah, please. Just run. Take Rex and disappear. We can all start over somewhere else. There is no starting over. These people don't forget, and they don't give up. The only way to protect our family is to eliminate the threat completely. After Linda hung up, promising to follow Sarah's instructions, Sarah called her parents in Portland. That conversation was even harder. Her father had always been protective, and the idea that his daughter was in mortal danger because she'd tried to help an animal made him furious at the world's injustice. You did the right thing, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But now you let the professionals handle it. Dad, I am a professional now. I've been training for 6 months. I know how to protect myself. You're a CPA, Sarah. You're not. A soldier. I'm whatever I need to be to keep this family safe. By evening, Sarah's entire family was in protective custody, Linda and her children at a secure hotel in San Francisco, her parents at a FBI safe house in Portland. The arrangements had been made through Detective Williams and a federal marshal named Sarah Rodriguez who specialized in witness protection. "Your family will be safe," Marshal Rodriguez assured her over a secure phone line. "But Sarah, this arrangement is temporary. We can't keep them hidden forever. You won't have to. This ends in the next few days, one way or another." As darkness fell over the compound, Sarah found herself on the observation deck with Rex, watching the desert stars and thinking about the journey that had brought her here. 18 months ago, she'd been a frightened neighbor who called the police 14 times and got nowhere. Now she was the center of a war between predators and their prey, surrounded by women who had transformed their trauma into deadly purpose. Rex sensed her mood and pressed against her leg, offering comfort. The dog had grown into a magnificent specimen, 95 pounds of muscle and intelligence, trained to distinguish between friend and foe with lethal precision. But more than that, he'd become her anchor, the living reminder of why this fight mattered. "You know what's coming, don't you?" she said softly, scratching behind his ears. "Tomorrow, we go home. And when they come for us, we show them what happens when you underestimate survivors." Rex's tail wagged once, a controlled movement that somehow conveyed understanding. Maria appeared on the deck, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the tactical gear that Sarah had learned meant business. "We've got movement," she reported. 3 vehicles spotted on Highway 99, heading toward Riverside. Jennifer's contacts in law enforcement confirmed they are not local. "How many?" "At least 12. Maybe more. They are converging on your neighborhood from different directions." Sarah felt the familiar flutter of adrenaline in her stomach, but it was different now. 6 months ago, the approach of Dale's associates would have paralyzed her with fear. Now it energized her. The prey had become the predator. "Are we ready?" "Your house is wired with enough surveillance equipment to make the NSA jealous. Every room, every angle, every approach. Jennifer's team is positioned in 3 locations with clear sight lines. Detective Williams has units standing by, but they'll stay back until we need them. And if something goes wrong..." Maria's smile was grim. "Then Rex gets to earn his keep." They spent the next hour reviewing the plan one final time. Sarah would return home, establish a normal routine, and wait. When Dale's network made their move, every moment would be recorded, every face identified, every crime documented. The legal case would be airtight, assuming any of them survived to stand trial. Remember, Jennifer joined them on the deck. "These aren't the bumbling amateurs who tried to kidnap you before. Dale's network has been planning this for months. They know about your training, your capabilities, your resources. They are coming prepared for a war." "Good," Sarah said. "So are we." At midnight, Sarah and Rex made the 40-mile drive back to Riverside. The desert highway was empty except for the occasional trucker, but Sarah knew they weren't alone. Maria's team was maintaining surveillance from multiple vehicles, ready to intervene if the network tried to intercept them en route. Maple Street looked exactly as she'd left it, quiet suburban houses with neat lawns and sleeping families. But Sarah could feel the tension in the air, the sense of predators circling their prey. Rex felt it too, his body languid shifting into the alert redness that meant danger was near. Dale Morrison's house stood empty and dark, a foreclosure notice taped to the front door. The backyard where he'd tortured animals had been filled in and reseeded, but Sarah could still see the subtle depressions where 18 graves had been excavated. The house would probably be demolished eventually, too tainted by its history to ever be a home again. Sarah's own house had been transformed during her absence. Hidden cameras monitored every approach. Motion sensors covered the yard. Panic buttons were installed in every room. To a casual observer, nothing had changed. But to anyone planning an assault, the place had become a fortress. As Sarah settled into her bedroom with Rex beside her, her phone buzzed with a final message. From the network, "Welcome home. See you soon." She typed back, "I'll be waiting." Outside, the street remained quiet. But in the distance, Sarah could see the faint glow of headlights as vehicles took positions around the neighborhood. Dale Morrison's network was moving into place, confident that they were about to capture the woman who had destroyed their leader. They had no idea that the woman they were hunting had become something far more dangerous than they could imagine. And when morning came, Sarah Chen was going to teach them the difference between a victim and a survivor. The final battle was about to begin. They came at dawn, just as Maria had predicted they would. Sarah watched through her bedroom window as 6 vehicles converged on Maple Street from different directions, not the amateur criminals who had tried to kidnap her months ago, but professionals who moved with military precision. They wore tactical gear, carried assault weapons, and positioned themselves with the confidence of men who had done this before. Rex was already at full alert, his body coiled with controlled energy as he tracked the movements outside. 6 months of training had transformed him into something magnificent and terrible, a guardian angel with fangs and the instincts of a predator. But unlike his tormentor Dale Morrison, Rex's violence served protection, not sadism. "Maria," Sarah whispered into her earpiece, "they are here. I see them. 12 shooters, at least 3 more in overwatch positions. They've been planning this for weeks." Through her hidden cameras, Sarah watched the network deploy around her house with tactical efficiency. They cut her power lines, disabled her internet connection, and jammed her cell phone signals, standard protocol for isolating a target. But they had no idea that every move was being recorded by military-grade surveillance equipment powered by independent batteries. "Jennifer's team is in position," Maria's voice crackled through the secure radio. "Detective Williams is standing by with SWAT. But remember, we need them to make the first move. Everything has to be documented." Sarah understood. This wasn't just about surviving the attack, it was about destroying Dale Morrison's entire network permanently. Every member who participated in this assault would be identified, arrested, and prosecuted. The evidence gathered today would dismantle a criminal organization that had operated with impunity for years. A figure appeared at her front door, a tall man with dead eyes who began working on her locks with professional tools. Through the thermal imaging cameras, Sarah could see 2 more men positioning themselves at her back door while others took covering positions around the perimeter. "They are coming in," she reported. "Remember the plan. Let them enter, let them reveal their intentions, then defend yourself. Rex knows what to do." The front door opened silently. Sarah felt her heart rate spike as she heard footsteps moving through her living room, but her hands remained steady on the modified shotgun Maria had given her. Months of training had taught her to channel fear into focus, panic into precision. Rex's ears twitched as he tracked the intruder's movements through the house. The dog's transformation was complete, from Dale Morrison's broken victim to Sarah's lethal guardian. Every lesson learned through torture had been reforged into protective instinct. "Sarah Chen," a voice called from downstairs. "We know you're here. Come down slowly, hands visible, and maybe we'll make this quick." Sarah's response was to chamber around in her shotgun. The sound echoed through the house like a declaration of war. "Have it your way," the voice continued. "Boys, tear this place apart. Find her." Multiple sets of footsteps began moving through the house, searching room by room. Sarah heard furniture being overturned, doors being kicked in, systematic destruction as they eliminated hiding places. These weren't burglars, they were executioners preparing a crime scene. Through her earpiece, she heard Jennifer's voice. "Legal authority established. They've made their intent clear. You are authorized to defend yourself by any means necessary." The first man reached the top of the stairs, assault rifle at the ready, face covered by a tactical mask. He moved like a soldier, checking corners and angles with professional competence. But he wasn't prepared for what he found in Sarah's bedroom. Rex hit him like a missile. The German Shepherd had been positioned behind the door, invisible to thermal imaging, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. 95 pounds of muscle and fury slammed into the gunman's chest, driving him backward into the stairway wall. His weapon clattered down the stairs as Rex's jaws found his throat. The man's scream was cut short by the crushing pressure of teeth trained to disable rather than kill, but only barely. Rex held him pinned, conscious but helpless, as Sarah emerged from her position behind the bed. One down, she reported calmly. Sarah. Another voice from downstairs, filled with rage and desperation. We know what you did to Morrison. We know about your little training camp. You think you can hunt us? We've been hunting your kind for decades. Your kind, Sarah repeated into her earpiece. They see this as a war between predators and prey. Then let's show them which one we are, Maria responded. The second gunman reached the top of the stairs and found his partner unconscious and bleeding, with Rex standing guard over the body. The dog's eyes reflected the dim light like twin flames, and his low growl promised violence to anyone who threatened his pack. The gunman raised his weapon, but Sarah was faster. The shotgun blast echoed through the house like thunder, and the man went down hard, his body armor cracked but intact. Non-lethal rounds, as Maria had insisted, they needed prisoners who could testify. 2 down, Sarah reported. But the network had come prepared for resistance. Through her window, Sarah saw one of the Overwatch positions firing something that wasn't bullets, tear gas canisters that shattered her bedroom windows and began filling the room with choking smoke. They are gassing the house, she coughed into a radio. Masks are in your nightstand, Maria replied. Rex's too. Sarah and Rex donned the gas masks they'd rehearsed with dozens of times, then moved to their predetermined fallback position, the reinforced bathroom that Maria's team had converted into a fortress. Steel plate walls, independent air supply, and clear sight lines to the hallway made it nearly impregnable. This is Detective Williams, a new voice crackled through the radio. We are moving in. Suspects are firing on a residential area with military weapons. We have authority to respond with lethal force. Through the chaos of tear gas and gunfire, Sarah heard the distinctive sound of SWAT vehicles surrounding the house. Car doors slamming, tactical teams deploying, bullhorns demanding surrender. The network had walked into a trap they never saw coming. But they weren't finished. Through the bathroom's bulletproof window, Sarah saw one of the gunmen pulling something from his backpack, a rectangular device with wires and a timer. A bomb. They are going to blow the house, she reported. We see it. Jennifer's moving to intercept. What happened next unfolded like a deadly ballet choreographed by months of planning. Jennifer Walsh appeared from her concealed position across the street, moving with the precision of someone who had transformed grief into lethal competence. Her rifle spoke once, and the bomber collapsed before he could arm his device. Rex sensed the shift in momentum and moved to the bathroom door. Ready to hunt. 6 months of rehabilitation and training had created something unprecedented, a dog who remembered every moment of his torture but had learned to use that trauma as fuel for protecting others. It's almost over, Sarah told him. Just a little more. The network's leader, the tall man who had opened her front door, appeared in the hallway, his tactical mask removed to reveal a face twisted with hatred. He held a pistol in one hand and a cattle prod in the other, the same type of weapon Dale Morrison had used on Rex. You destroyed everything, he snarled at Sarah. 18 years building our community, and you ruined it all for one worthless animal. Rex's growl deepened to a sound that seemed to come from hell itself. The dog remembered that weapon, remembered the pain, remembered the helplessness. But he wasn't helpless anymore. That worthless animal is about to end your career, Sarah replied. The man raised the cattle prod, electricity crackling blue between the contacts. Let's see how your precious dog handles a taste of real discipline. He never got the chance to find out. Rex moved faster than human reflexes could follow. A blur of muscle and vengeance that struck with the precision of a guided missile. The cattle prod went flying as the dog's weight drove the man to the ground, jaws clamping down on the wrist that held the weapon. But this time, Rex didn't just disable, he destroyed. The wet sound of bones breaking echoed through the hallway. The man's screams were cut short by the arrival of SWAT officers who flooded the house like an avenging tide. Smoke grenades, flashbangs, and tactical teams moving with overwhelming force to secure every room. When the smoke cleared, 12 members of Dale Morrison's network were in custody, with enough video evidence to ensure life sentences for all of them. The bomb had been disarmed, the weapons seized, and most importantly, the communications equipment. That would lead authorities to the remaining network members across 14 states. Sarah emerged from her bathroom fortress to find her house destroyed but her life intact. Rex stood beside her, his fur matted with the blood of men who had thought they could terrorize the innocent with impunity. The dog's eyes held a satisfaction. That was almost human, the look of someone who had faced their demons and won. Detective Williams approached them, his expression a mixture of relief and professional admiration. "Mrs. Chen, I've been in law enforcement for 20 years and I've never seen anything like this. You and Rex just dismantled one of the most dangerous criminal networks in the country." "We had good teachers," Sarah replied, stroking Rex's head. As the crime scene teams worked around them, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, her heart. 1 year later, Sarah Chen stood in the backyard of her rebuilt home, watching Rex chase a tennis ball with the pure joy of a dog who had forgotten what it meant to be afraid. The German Shepherd was magnificent in the morning sunlight, his coat thick and lustrous, his eyes bright with intelligence and contentment. The physical scars from Dale Morrison's torture had faded, but more importantly, the psychological wounds had healed into strength. The house itself had been transformed. Where Dale Morrison's property once stood, the city had built a memorial garden dedicated to animal victims of cruelty. 18 oak saplings marked the spots where innocent creatures had been buried, their plaques bearing simple inscriptions: beloved, missed, not forgotten. It was a place of peace now, where families brought their children to learn about compassion and responsibility. Sarah's own home had been rebuilt from the ground up, the insurance settlement from the siege allowing her to create something both beautiful and secure. But the most important addition wasn't architectural, it was the constant stream of visitors who came to meet the woman and dog who had brought down a criminal empire. Mrs. Chen. A young woman stood at the back gate, holding the leash of a trembling pit bull mix. "I'm Maria Santos, not the trainer, a different Maria. I heard about what you did, and I was hoping my dog was rescued from a fighting ring. And is so scared of everything. The shelter said you might be able to help." Sarah smiled, setting down her coffee cup. This happened at least twice a week now, people with traumatized animals seeking the wisdom she'd gained through her own journey with Rex. She'd become something she never intended, a symbol of healing and second chances. "What's his name?" Sarah asked, approaching slowly as Rex positioned himself nearby, demonstrating calm confidence. "Diesel. He hasn't wagged his tail once since I adopted him. He flinches at every sound, won't let anyone touch him except to feed him." The woman's eyes were bright with tears. "The vet says there's nothing physically wrong, but mentally." "Rex was the same way," Sarah said gently. "Come on, let's sit on the porch. Sometimes healing starts with just being in a safe space." As they settled on the rebuilt deck, Rex approached Diesel with the careful body language Maria Santos had taught him, the original Maria, who had become like family to Sarah over the past year. The German Shepherd had developed an almost supernatural ability to read traumatized animals, knowing exactly how to approach without triggering fear responses. Diesel's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. Instead of the aggression or flight response Sarah expected, the pit bull simply collapsed to the ground and began to shake. But Rex didn't retreat. He lay down nearby, close enough to offer comfort but far enough away to avoid triggering panic. "How do you do it?" the young woman asked. "How do you help them trust again?" Sarah watched Rex's patient demonstration of non-threatening presence, remembering the months of work it had taken to reach this point. "You don't heal trauma by pretending it didn't happen," she said. "You heal it by showing them that their pain had meaning, that their survival made them stronger, and that they are safe now." They spent the next hour in comfortable silence, watching as Diesel gradually stopped shaking and began to take tentative interest in Rex's calm presence. It wasn't a miracle cure that would take months of patient work, but it was a beginning. After Maria left with Diesel and Sarah's contact information, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she'd memorized but hoped never to see again: California State Prison. "This is Sarah Chen. You have a collect call from an inmate at California State Prison. Will you accept the charges?" Sarah's stomach clenched. But she forced herself to answer. "Yes." Dale Morrison's voice was a shadow of its former self, hollow, broken, defeated. "Sarah." "Dale." She kept her voice neutral, professional. Rex sensed the tension and moved closer, offering silent support. I wanted you to know, Dale continued, that they are all gone. Every single member of the network. The FBI used the evidence from your house to track down 312 people across 19 states. They are all in prison now. All of them. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. Good. Do you know what it's like, Dale's voice cracked, to know that your life's work was destroyed by one woman and one dog? I know what it's like to watch innocent creatures suffer while everyone looks the other way, Sarah replied. I know what it's like to be afraid in your own home. I know what it's like to feel helpless while monsters operate with impunity. I made Rex stronger, Dale said, and Sarah could hear the desperate need for meaning in his voice. Everything I did to him, it made him into what he became. Without me, he never would have been capable of protecting you. Sarah looked at Rex, who was lying peacefully in a patch of sunlight, utterly content. You didn't make Rex stronger, Dale. You tried to break him. Rex made himself stronger, despite everything you did to him. That's the difference between a victim and a survivor. I think about that night sometimes, Dale continued. When you used my own weapon against me. When Rex bit me. It was a magnificent. I created something magnificent. You created nothing but pain. Rex's strength comes from his decision to protect rather than destroy. My strength comes from choosing to fight for something bigger than myself. You'll never understand that. Maybe not. But I want you to know I'm proud of what you became. What you both became. Sarah ended the call without another word. Dale Morrison's last attempt to claim credit for their transformation was pathetic and desperate, the final manipulation of a broken predator trying to find meaning in his own destruction. Rex raised his head and looked at her with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand exactly what had just happened. The dog who had once cowered in Dale's backyard now radiated calm confidence, secure in his purpose and his place in the world. He'll never understand, Sarah told Rex, scratching behind his ears. He thinks strength comes from causing pain. But real strength comes from healing it. That evening, Sarah sat on her porch reading the newspaper's annual anniversary article about the case. The headline read, Local Hero Continues Animal Rescue Work 1 Year After Dismantling Criminal Network. The article detailed the foundation she'd established with Dale Morrison's seized assets, money that had once funded cruelty now paid for rehabilitation and training programs for abused animals. But the most satisfying paragraph was buried near the end. Dale Morrison, 44, is currently serving life without parole at California State Prison. According to corrections officials, Morrison has been attacked 17 times by fellow inmates and spends 23 hours a day in protective custody. His requests for interviews have been universally denied. Rex dozed beside her chair, his breathing deep and peaceful. Tomorrow would bring new visitors, more people with traumatized animals seeking hope, more stories of survival and healing. Sarah had found her life's purpose in the most unlikely place, in the ashes of her own terror and the transformation of a broken dog into a guardian angel. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Walsh, heading your way next week. New case. In Oregon, animal fighting ring with connections to human trafficking. Could use your expertise. Sarah looked at Rex, who opened one eye as if sensing her thoughts. The dog's tail wagged once, a controlled movement that somehow conveyed readiness for whatever came next. What do you think, boy? Ready for another adventure? Rex stood and stretched, his body language radiating confidence and purpose. The dog who had once been Dale Morrison's victim had become something the monster never anticipated, a weapon forged in trauma but tempered by love, dedicated to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. As the sun set over the memorial garden, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She'd started as a frightened CPA who couldn't sleep because of her neighbor's cruelty. She'd become a guardian, a protector, a voice for the voiceless. But more than that, she'd learned that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism came not from those born to greatness, but from ordinary people pushed beyond their limits who chose to push back. Dale Morrison had tried to create a legacy of fear and suffering. Instead, he'd created something beautiful, a bond between a woman and a dog that had saved hundreds of lives and given hope to countless survivors of cruelty. In the end, that was justice in its purest form. Not the cold calculation of courtrooms or the sterile satisfaction of prison sentences, but the warm reality of healing, the daily choice to transform pain into purpose, and the unbreakable bond between two souls who had faced hell and walked out stronger. The neighborhood from hell had become a beacon of hope. The monster had been destroyed by his own victims. And somewhere in the gathering dusk, Sarah Chen and Rex prepared for whatever battles lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that some bonds could never be broken. The war was over. The healing had begun. And evil, in all its forms, had learned to fear the victims who refused to stay victims. It was a good day to be alive.